Hello everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, where it's good to remember we should be careful what we wish for. I have finished a couple books. That's what I want to talk about. One of them I finished reading a while ago, but I had lent it to my brother, and so I got it back, and I'll talk about that. And then one that I just finished within the last couple of days, within the last week, actually. Um, so yeah, the first one is this one here, Into the Wild by John Krakauer. This is a book that fits into a category for me. I wouldn't say this is a universal category. It's a category for me of books that I was reluctant to read for reasons I cannot easily describe. But I did finally get around to it. There was a movie also made of this. So Into the Wild is a I guess you could say a chronicle of what happened to a young man by the name of Christopher Johnson McCandless, who back in 1992 hiked into the Alaska wilderness, where he disappeared and then was later found dead. So the story, we know what happened to McCandless. He died alone out in the wilderness. What was relatively unknown and more difficult to piece together was why he ended up there, coming from a very comfortable upper middle class, perhaps bougie family in the Washington D.C. Area, and the highly educated parents. In fact, his father was a scientist who had developed some key technologies for NASA, and he was a highly intelligent kid who went and got his degree at Emory University in Georgia. But after he got his degree, instead of coming home like he promised his parents, he took off on this excursion across the country and disappeared without any communication at all with his family that he had left behind, his parents and a sister. And then, later he was found dead in an old abandoned school bus in the Alaska wilderness, just north of Denali, Mount McKinley, in the national park there. And it's kind of a remarkable story in how, what motivated McCandless to do what he did, and that was really interesting to me, because I've been a wilderness backpacker, wilderness hiker. I have learned enough skills that probably couldn't do it. I couldn't do it now, but in my youth, I had learned enough skills that I could survive in a wilderness setting. Probably not as long, maybe longer than McCandless did. But I had this love of exploration as well. And, you really feel that with McCandless in the description. Krakauer does a really good job of piecing together what we do know about McCandless, because he did write journals. He did make connections with people that he met while traveling around the country. And so we have some information and we have some observations about him from others that kind of clue us into why did this kid do this? Just this, he had this like romantic obsession with becoming one with the wilderness. And it's, and I say obsession because as you read, you begin to realize that some of his decisions in key points were not very well thought out and were driven by an idealism that wasn't supported a whole lot by reality. But nonetheless, such a great read. There's I highlighted some passages here because, like, one of the things that McCandless did, he would read voraciously a lot of different writers, and for a while he was reading Jack London's work because it was McCandless's goal always to get to Alaska, and so he read a lot of Jack London's work. And in fact, this was something that began, in childhood. And in fact, he learned a lot of skills in backpacking and camping and hiking as a child with his father on many different trips. So he was, well equipped, skill set wise for the most part, to adapting to a life in the wilderness or in a very peripatetic and homeless lifestyle. But this passage here about his infatuation with Jack London is pretty interesting. McCandless had been infatuated with London since childhood. London's fervent condemnation of capitalist society, his glorification of the primordial world, his championing of the great unwashed. All of it mirrored McCandless's passions. Mesmerized by London's turgid portrayal of life in Alaska and the Yukon, McCandless read and reread The Call of the Wild, White Fang, To Build a Fire, An Odyssey of the North, The Wit of Porpotuk. He was so enthralled by these tales, however, that he seemed to forget they were works of fiction, constructions of the imagination that had more to do with London's romantic sensibilities than with the actualities of life in the subarctic wilderness. McCandless conveniently overlooked the fact that London himself had spent just a single winter in the North and that he died by his own hand on his California estate at the age of 40, a fatuous drunk, obese, and pathetic, maintaining a sedentary existence that bore scant resemblance to the ideals he espoused in print. So that obsession with Jack London and the romantic vision that London presented in his fiction, it serves as a good point of reference in describing McCandless's own romantic vision of living in the wilderness, living off the grid, that it was, while McCandless had developed skills necessary to do this, and he was very successful in many ways, it was nonetheless built upon this chimera of idealism, and lacked the proper perspective of reality that would be necessary for him to survive, which seems a bit paradoxical because he did so well surviving on his own in remarkable ways. Truly astounding feats that he accomplished, such as the time when he's canoeing through the delta area of the Colorado River and constantly being lost amid the various side channels and whatnot, but he found his way through it. And that was really interesting for me to read too, because I had read Aldo Leopold's writings, and he also described a similar maze of waterways at the lower Colorado River before it enters the Sea of Cortez. This other one too, in his, he says goodbye to people before he heads up to Alaska. And for example, he sends this postcard from Montana to somebody April 18th. This would have been, it would have been, 1992. Arrived in Whitefish this morning on a freight train. So he hoboed. He would hop trains to get around, although he did have a car for a while that he had to abandon. I'm making good time. Today I will jump the border and turn north for Alaska. Give my regards to everyone. So that was one of his final communications to people that he had connected with. And so it was, it appears that he had this intention that he was going to go up there to prove to himself that he could live off the land. And then he would come back. But he didn't. And there was another interesting part in here was when he was hanging out in this area down by Palm Springs, California, in the Salton Sea, in this community, I guess you could call it a homeless community, but it was kind of they had homes, and this is what they were living, and it was called Slab City, or the Slabs. And there is a documentary called Desert Coffee that you can watch on Prime that is set in this sort of counterculture community called Slab City. And it was really interesting to watch that documentary after having read about it here in this book. So the descriptions and I will say that Krakauer is very careful in the conclusions that he's reaching, because realistically the evidence is really scant. But it was a fascinating read, and I really enjoyed this. Now, I mentioned that there was a movie made about it, a film adaptation. I'm not sure I want to watch it, because this at least lets you know as you're reading it that, we don't know a lot about what motivated McCandless to do this. There's speculation at the end that's pretty strong. There's evidence-based conclusions that Krakauer reaches that point to the reason why McCandless basically chucked his life for this existence on the road in the wilderness, and he wasn't anti-human, he wasn't trying to be a hermit, but at the same time he really had no use for mankind and saw existence in our society largely as a pointless joke. But anyway, it was really good read, and I'm glad I finally got around to reading it. So especially if you are someone who likes to have time in the wilderness, alone time in the wilderness. You enjoy hiking, backpacking, camping. Um, you enjoy the challenges the wilderness can present. I'm not talking about, you know, taking an RV into a national park campground and hooking up to water and electricity and enjoying, the wilderness that way. Um, I'm talking about, wilderness trekking. And if that's something you enjoy to do from time to time, and you have that aesthetic, perhaps you've read Aldo Leopold, and you've read the books by Edward Abbey, um, and other writings by John Muir, etc. You have an affinity for that philosophy and that type of writing, then I think you will really enjoy Into the Wild. All right, next book is a brand new one, published this year, 2025, and that is The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. So this book is the second novel by Ocean Vuong, who is probably more well known as a poet. His first book was from 2019, so it's been a while since he had another book. And that first novel was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is a fantastic, brilliant novel. Definitely among the best reads that I've had in the last decade. Emperor of Gladness is really good as well, but I think On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is better. But Ocean Vuong he's again contemplating and examining the troubled relationship an immigrant's child has with his mother, which was a theme very much part of On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. The structure of that story is Little Dog is the protagonist. It's a letter to his mother, and covering the love and the turmoil of the mother-son relationship, especially in this of the immigration or the immigrant status, because Ocean Vuong is Vietnamese. He was born in Vietnam, but came to the U.S. like the characters in his book when he was quite young. So he was easily Americanized, whereas his mother was not. Didn't learn the language, but learned how to exist, in the U.S. So we have that theme going on as well in The Emperor of Gladness, and it's set in Connecticut, just like On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and the language again can be quite poetic and descriptive. I had this passage here I wanted to read to give an example of this, as he's describing the landscape early in the story of where this is going to take place. Our lawns are overrun with ragweed and quackgrass, one of them offering a row of red and pink tulips each spring, heads snared through the chain link they lean on. The nearby porch overflows with rideable plastic toys, a wagon, tricycles, a fire truck, their primary colors now faded to Easter hues. A milk crate with a flap of an old tire nailed across its opening is a mailbox set on a rotted sideboard. Ramirez, 47, written on the rubber in whiteout. Beside this is a tin bird feeder, the shape of Bill Clinton's head. Seeds spill from his laughing mouth and fall like applause each time the wind comes off the freighter that blows through the place in the night's unseen hours. Though the train never stops in our town, its whistle can be heard in every living room 3 miles out. Nothing stops here but us, really. Hartford, the capital built on insurance firms, firearms, and hospital equipment, bureaucracies of death and catastrophe, is only 12 minutes by car down the interstate, and everyone rushes past us, either on their way in or to get the hell out. We are the blur in the windows of your trains and minivans, your greyhounds, our faces mangled by wind and speed like castaway Munch paintings. The only things we share with the city are the ambulances, being close enough to Hartford for them to come fetch us when we're near dead or rattling away on steel gurneys without next of kin. We live on the edges, but die in the heart of the state. We pay taxes on every check to stand on the sinking banks of a river that becomes the morgue of our dreams. So we have this character, Hai, who has a very troubled relationship with his mother, much like Little Dog in the previous novel. And he lies to his mother, telling her that he's gone to Boston to attend medical school and become a doctor. You know, the dream of every Asian mother, right? That their son becomes a doctor or a lawyer. And instead, the novel begins with him contemplating jumping from a bridge, but he's very ambivalent about even doing that. And his near mishap is interrupted by this old woman who lives alone by the river where he's standing on this bridge trestle. Her name is Grazina, a Lithuanian refugee. And she orders him to come in, to make sure that he's all right. And this begins this really unusual relationship between the two of them. Hai, who is 19 years old, aimless, has substance abuse issues, and Grazina, who lived through World War II and the bombing. So we've got two people with severe trauma. That's what's at the center, really, of this story, are people and how they deal with their personal traumas. Because while on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, the gay theme is much stronger in that book than it is in this one. While there are numerous, for example, passages on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous that describe Little Dog's sexual encounters with this white boy that comes from an abusive home. Again, trauma is very much central to the theme in that novel as well. But the gay theme in here is, it's there, but there's like one section in the book in which Hai hooks up with this other person, but there's really no description of their activity other than, what happened, because the scene begins with them in a motel room, a Motel 6. But yeah, it's all this. So this trauma, because the trauma that Hai is carrying with him is he had this other boyfriend, very similar to the same boyfriend that was in the previous novel. And he's dealing with the trauma that resulted from his friend's overdose. And so that trauma is through that. There's Griselda's trauma of dealing with the war. And then there is Hai's cousin, Sony, named Sony because of the television brand Sony, who was born with hydrocephaly and has this big scar in his head, and seems to be of somewhat limited intellectual and emotional capacity, but that's really more of a projection of how everybody else perceives him. But his trauma as well and he becomes this savant about the Civil War. There's his trauma as well, dealing with the fact that his mother, who all right, so Hai and Sony are cousins because their mothers are sisters. And Sony's mother is in jail, prison, unable to get out because they can't put together the bail. So she's in prison waiting for something to happen. And now that I think about it, I'm not exactly clear. I think she was charged with some theft or embezzlement or something like that. But anyway, yeah, all these other, and then there's Hai gets this job at a fast food place, and he starts working with these other people who are all misfits. They're working in the restaurant. Their manager is this. She's a Caribbean woman who has dreams of becoming a professional, wrestler. And then they all have. Well, we don't necessarily learn as much about everyone else's trauma. That is the central theme of the book, are all these people who have traumas, revealing perhaps to the reader that everyone has some kind of trauma that shapes who they are, whether we are aware of that or whether we are completely oblivious to that. So this is a book that really doesn't have a traditional arc of narrative. All right. This isn't driven so much by events moving characters along in a predetermined and orderly fashion to get to what the writer is trying to do. Rather, it is each character's response to and reaction to what life throws them that sends them into the next experience and then the next experience. So while there is an arc that is going on here, it's not the traditional arc that you would expect in a more linear format of storytelling. And I frankly really like that kind of storytelling better. So there's some other things here that passages that I highlighted that I thought were really quite remarkable. So like there's this intimate moment when Hai is with Sony, and they're watching, I believe they were watching television. He came over because Hai ends up living with Grazina, and they end up watching Gettysburg, right? Because Sony is infatuated with the Civil War, so they have a VHS of Sony's favorite film, Gettysburg, with Jeff Daniels. And so there's this intimate moment between Hai and Sony, and they're sitting together, I think, on the couch here. Out of desperation or stupidity, he couldn't tell, Hai pinched a single goldfish, goldfish crackers, and made it swim toward Sony, then toward where his head scar began. Sony fixed his eyes on the cracker as Hai made it swim down his cousin's scar river, just like the one running outside the house, the skin smooth and reflecting the light from the corpses on TV, all the way back to the nape of his neck where it left the river, swimming around his head past Sony's eyes, which had brightened with a mix of confusion and delight, and into Hai's open mouth. Sony giggled, covering his teeth like a child. That's gross. Hai shrugged, chewing. Tastes a lot better now, though. They settled into the end of the film. After the credits rolled and Sony was asleep, Hai slipped upstairs to call his mother. Alone in the dark, it was good to hear her voice. He was sorry he couldn't be there for the holiday, and she told him it didn't matter since they never celebrated anyway. But he knew his absence, like all the other times, hurt. She must have decorated so many women's nails with turkeys and bright orange leaves and pumpkins all week, her clients gushing about their big family plans. I'm doing well, Ma, he said. I'm making money, too. As an assistant in a medical lab on campus. It's not much, but it's something. So he's perpetuating this lie to his mother, because he's, Gladness is there's the name of the town. He's in East Gladness, where Grazina lives, and his mother is in what was formerly known as Gladness, but has been changed. The town's name has been changed. So he's like, but because there's such a separation in terms of his mother would never come over to this side of town, so he's out and about, and never has to really worry about ever unintentionally encountering her. And so he can perpetuate this myth that he's in medical school in Boston. So it's a really quite amazing story. Ocean Vuong is just an amazing writer. And the story, the resolution is, it's satisfactory. It resolves satisfactorily, I'll say that. And some of the experiences that happen are really, they're enthralling, and they're warm, and they're tender, even during moments of violence and shock. That's the best way I can describe it. So yes, a really amazing book, The Emperor of Gladness. Excellent book. I still like On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous better, but when I say that, I'm not saying this isn't a superb book. It is. It is a excellent book. I mean, if I were to, I guess what I'm saying is, if I give On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous a 10 out of 10, I would give this a 9.5 out of 10. All right, so it's a really excellent book. Strongly recommend it. And then I've really switched things up in terms of the book I'm currently reading, which I'll probably, I'll do something on it, when I finish. And this is one of my intimidating books as well, simply because of how just big and how massive the topic is. And that's this one here, The Cold War, by Odd Arne Westad, who was a Harvard, or is a Harvard professor of history, I believe. Yeah, this is a general description of the Cold War going all the way back to the late 19th century, and then all the way through to the fall of the Berlin Wall. We'll see how that. It's a good read so far, but it definitely is a not very deep description. It is just kind of quickly laying things out, at least in the first couple chapters. We'll see how it goes as I get further along. I hope you enjoyed this rambling, which is now 36 minutes, and I had no idea it was going to be this long because, well, I can get talking about stuff, and sometimes I don't need to be talking that much. But anyway, hey, leave a comment in the down under. I appreciate getting those. And do a thumbs up, hit the like button, because that does help with distribution of the content. And you should be doing that with any video that you watch on YouTube and you enjoyed it. Hit that like button. It helps the content creator. I can also be found on Instagram as NewsDude76. That's NEWZDUDE76. And I have a Facebook page called Calvin Wazoo. That, however, is more focused on my record collecting, vinyl record collecting, and music, where I post my videos and other videos, and also articles that I find that are music related. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. And always remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.